Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wondered about music. So, whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. Okay, so today I'm so excited to be joined by Jennie Silber, who's part of the founding team at Koodos Labs and is currently working on a really exciting product called Shelf. So Jennie once described it as the love child of Spotify Wrapped, Goodreads, and Letterboxd, which I think is such a perfect way to put it. It's essentially a digital shelf that evolves as you consume content online. So it becomes this really rich reflection of your taste, your identity, and even how you connect with other people. Jennie is currently an engineer on the team, focusing on analytics and data science, but her background is actually super interesting. She started out in the legal world, working with artists like Usher, Lil Wayne, The Weeknd, Lizzo, Carly Rae Jepsen, and Paul Simon, just to name a few, before moving into data, research, and product. So today we're going to be diving into one of my favorite topics in music psychology, which is music taste, because taste isn't just about what you like, it's all about identity, self-expression, and how we relate to other people. So I'm really excited to explore this from both a psychology perspective and your first-hand experience of actually building a product around it. So Jennie, hi, welcome.
Hello. Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, so happy for you to be here. Let's kind of dive straight into it. Maybe starting out with a little bit about your journey, Jennie. You've lived a million lives, it feels like, been through lots of different roles before Shelf and during. So, kind of just tell me a little bit about where it all began for you.
Yeah, would love to. Yeah, maybe I guess I could start with just the fact that music has always been a really big part of my life. I grew up in theater, singing, playing saxophone in jazz band, a cappella. I'm in choir here in New York now. I even studied music in college alongside some other things. I had a very liberal arts education. And following college, I kind of wanted to marry two parts of myself, the more like analytical, logical part and the more expressive, creative part of myself. And I thought I wanted to become a lawyer, which you mentioned, specifically a music lawyer. So I went and worked at an entertainment law firm. I learned a lot about that field, and it was really interesting working with some cool artists, learning kind of the behind the scenes of some of these creative projects. Was super cool, and that was almost the path that I was going to take. Um, but at the time, the CEO of my current company, Shelf, had reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he found a paper I wrote in college, my senior thesis. It was on music recommendation algorithms. And I was actually shocked anybody found this paper because it was hidden in like the depths of the internet, but it felt really serendipitous. And yeah, he was really interesting. He was at business school at the time, studying the internet, platform incentives, how taste emerges. And yeah, it felt like it would be a really great creative opportunity for me to dive into next, to work with him. And we wound up building a bunch of really cool early products and experiments. And yeah, I guess I never thought I would be, in the startup world. But it really appealed to me. And like looking back, it makes a lot of sense considering my personality and kind of what I wanted out of a career. I didn't, like feeling stagnant. I like to, learn new skills and challenge myself and have a real impact on people. And that was really appealing there. And so, yeah, I started working with him, doing user research and community work, talking with users about how their taste, how they experience it, how they share it. And yeah, I learned a lot. I think in the early days, the qualitative stuff was really fun, but I felt like I wasn't really getting a holistic picture of the user and their needs and, what we should be building for them. And so I got interested in the quantitative side of stuff and learned our analytics stack. And there's this whole world of data analytics with querying our database and started learning SQL and Python and a bunch of coding languages. And it kind of took off from there. And yeah, that kind of led me to engineering and data science. And the thing I really love about, having all these experiences and learning all these skills is I could take, it's not just having an idea, but you can take an idea and execute on it and have real impact. And that's been really exciting for me in my career so far.
100%. No, I think that's such an amazing journey to kind of be able to go through so young as well and kind of try out something and be like, okay, actually, this doesn't align with exactly what I want to do. And it feels like that opportunity came up at exactly the right time, which is amazing. What do you think convinced you to take the risk on, such an early stage product? Was it just, you were ready to kind of experiment and try something new?
Yeah, it just felt like the right opportunity. Like it wasn't expected at all. I mean, I was really young at the time, and it was a risk I could take. I didn't know for sure if I wanted to go to law school and like really pursue that career. So this was kind of my experimental phase where I was just seeing what felt right for me, and um, I felt like I could really express myself creatively in this career path, and that is something that I've always tried to do in everything, I pursue, so, yeah, and just the people that I got to work with, it just felt like really good-hearted people. People were really trying to have a positive change on the world and the internet, and, yeah, I couldn't pass that up.
Yeah, definitely. I think always the people that you work with really make an experience what it is. So it's amazing to be
Mhm.
surrounded by those people. That's awesome. So maybe let's dive into the kind of core of our discussion today by talking a little bit about what taste actually is. So in music psych, we call it musical preference, and it's kind of defined as this habitual long-term preference for specific styles, genres, or features. And it really serves as an extension of personality, identity, and emotional regulation as well, right? And there's a large body of research in the field that shows that music taste also works almost like a social badge, which I know we'll get into throughout our discussion today. Like the artists that you listen to, they're not just preferences, they're kind of signals. They tell people something about who you are or even who you want to be as well. So tell me from your perspective, if you had to kind of break taste down into different components, what do you think some of those variables are? How would you define taste itself?
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question, and I think it's something we're continuing to dive deeper into. But I think at the core, something we've learned is, taste is not just what you consume or what you prefer. It's not just your list of favorites, but it's much more deep than that. It's what resonates with you, what feels representative of you, what you use to express yourself, and taste is so personal to everybody. And it's not just about liking something; it's about what that thing means to you and helps communicate about you. And I think one thing that I find most compelling and that we've seen resonate with users is not just what your taste is right now. I think that's like a snapshot of yourself, but how it changes and evolves over time, I think, is where it gets really interesting. And seeing that evolution in myself and in our users, I think it helps people better understand themselves. We have features where you can see yourself last week, yourself last month, yourself last year, and it really gives you more perspective on what those shifts in taste might say about you and how you're evolving as a person. And I think that context is really important for understanding somebody's taste.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I instantly think about things like Spotify Wrapped. I guess that's why people care so much about those things, right? And I guess that was a big inspiration for you over at Shelf as well, I can imagine.
For sure, Spotify Wrapped, things like CoStar that tell you things about your taste, Myers-Briggs, like any kind of personality test or like insightful kind of display of taste has been a big inspiration for us, and Spotify Wrapped especially. I think one of the biggest appeals to it is just like the time aspect. It happens once a year. It feels really special. I think most people tend to have a sense of what theirs will be. Like I usually am thinking about a list of at least like 10 artists that could show up on my top 5, but there's still enough surprise there to make it exciting. And I think Spotify Wrapped also does a really good job of saying, this is your data, but this is also what your data says about you. And that second layer is what makes it really sticky.
Definitely. It's about turning your listening into a kind of story, right? Like this is who
Mhm.
you were this year. And I think music is so personal anyway that it's always so special to see that reflected back as well. But I always say, like, people just love data, and data is such a great way of understanding ourselves. We love to quantify these abstract things, and we have like a tangible way to relate to ourselves, but also like other people as well, right?
Totally, yeah, and I think it's super comparative too, which is what makes it really fun, is, like, I'll always share my Spotify Wrapped in my group chats with my friends. We'll, have a chance to kinda poke fun at each other for, being too basic, or we're able to, like, compete for who listened to the most music that year, and I think that's what makes it really special as well. And it's interesting people get I think identity is really tied to Spotify Wrapped in a lot of ways. Like, I know friends who their Spotify Wrapped gets completely hijacked by, like, sleep music all year, and it's like, yes, that's accurate, but does that really represent me? Is that how I wanna be perceived to other people? I think that's a deeper question there, and people, they wanna feel proud of their taste, so, Spotify Wrapped can be a way to do that if you feel like it truly represents you.
Definitely. I think, we share certain things, right? Everyone's got guilty pleasures that stay private. Even, yeah, sleep music is a good example, of those more functional music that, we'd rather keep private because maybe it's not a reflection of our taste or identity like all the time, but it's more like a snippet of our life, right? So I think that's really interesting. Now, another question that kind of comes to mind for me, which I think is maybe another loaded question, is how do you separate who someone is from what the algorithm feeds them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there's a really big tension there, actually. I think in today's world, we're constantly being, fed content from an algorithm, and because of that, a lot of taste feels partly co-created by these algorithms. We're not necessarily choosing from, like, a neutral universe of options. A lot of times, these platforms are choosing what we are exposed to.
Mm.
So I think it's hard to separate the two, and I think modern taste is kind of a mix of, discovery and influence and what resonates with you. And I think you have to be intentional about how you let it shape your taste and who you are. And I think people can get trapped in these echo chambers of the same taste and the same opinions. And yeah, you have to be really conscious of how your feeds are influencing you and, what you spend your time with.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's increasingly difficult to kind of separate those things, especially when we're faced with a lot of short form content on different platforms, outside of our music streaming. And that's a big way that people discover music these days, right? Is like through TikTok, through Instagram, all these different platforms. And, I know that drives a lot of the streaming charts in general. So it's that larger question of, is that something that we kind of choose to engage with, or is that something that's like pushed on us in a way, which is always interesting because you see these songs from years ago resurfacing just because of like viral TikToks, right? Which is a really interesting phenomenon, I always think.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I've been onto Justin Bieber and his old catalog of everything because of Biebercella, and yeah, these moments in culture kind of are more surfaced more regularly on TikTok and all these other different platforms, and it creates these phenomenons where like old trends come back. I think the short form part is also changing a lot of the way that people make music, where it's these sound bites of really quippy, quick choruses, and it changes the way that artists write because, they want to get that engagement, and it's interesting how it's changed the industry over time.
Definitely. And that, when you said Biebercella, that instantly just brought the word nostalgia to my mind, which
Mhm.
I think is such a large part of the industry in general these days. And that reminds me of what you said a little bit earlier around, our music taste kind of changing throughout our life. And, depending on our life stage and environment, it's very dynamic, I would say. And I think we're in this era right now. I was talking to a friend about it the other day. We had Bieber performing at Coachella. We had like the Hannah Montana 20-year
Mhm.
anniversary, and I think especially like our generation is going through this huge like nostalgia shift right now, which is probably influencing a lot of people's streaming habits and taste at the moment, really going back into that previous version of ourselves, maybe when we were kids and like engaging with that. What's been your experience with, music taste changing over time, and how do you kind of manage that?
Yeah, I think that's one of my I guess, my favorite parts of music listening. Like, I'm somebody who beats a song into the ground until I'm sick of it. So I definitely go through phases and eras, and, I love a lot of different kinds of genres. But I do think at my core, like, I do have taste that is stable, that, like, is carried throughout the years. But definitely I get into different phases where, I'm super into this one artist, or, like, I've recently been in an R&B phase, like, super into Thames and, like, Leon Thomas and artists like that, but another day I'm, like, belting Broadway tunes, like, it's one thing to another, and I think, it just proves, like, people are really, like, multi-hyphenate and, have a lot of different parts of their identities that come through at different times based on the stage of life they're in, their environment, their mood, even who they're around. Like, I think people want very different things in different moments. It's kinda similar to even, like, food. Like, I think people get into phases where,
Yeah.
like, they're super into a certain food, but then there's always you come back to the stable things that you like. So, it's very similar to that in my mind.
For sure, definitely. And there's this idea in psychology called the reminiscence bump, which basically says, the music that you listen to, particularly in your teenage years, I think it's like, from age 10 to 30, but those are kind of your most formative years, right? And that music is supposed to stick with you the most. So, we're kind of in this moment now where we're really forming that kind of core part of our identity. I wonder if that like lines up for you at all.
Yeah, I think I'll see it in the future after I'm 30, I guess, if my taste
Yeah,
stops changing as frequently, but, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that tends to go for, like, a lot of things, in your formative years, that really shape who you are, and people are more resistant to change the older they get, so I think that kind of tracks, yeah.
definitely. I think just because, we're forming the most kind of like potent memories as well during this time. So yeah, we can look back on it one day and see whether that holds. But yeah, research shows that it really does. And I think that's, when you work with like dementia patients and things like that, you really see that those are the most kind of salient memories that they have are like from this period in time. So yeah, taste really does stick with you. It's pretty magical. I love that. Yeah, so maybe let's move on to measuring taste. So get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty part of what you're doing at Shelf. So what would you say are some of the most important signals when you're building a taste profile for someone?
Yeah, I think this is still something we're learning about and really interested in investing in actually. And there are some more obvious signals that you can think of, like, things that you're consuming the most or repeating the most, your genre diversity, how mainstream are you, how niche are you, what are your trends over time. But I think one thing that we've learned over time is, there's this missing piece of context that, data doesn't necessarily have. And a lot of times that's reliance on user input. Behavior alone only will get you so far, and I think there's a huge difference between what someone consumed, and, what they actually cared about, what they felt was representative of them, what they thought about it. Like, I think that's, something as simple as, like, a rating on a movie can really tell you a lot about how a person experienced that thing. Um, and there's I think that's where taste profiles get much richer. It's not just from passive tracking, but combining behavior with interpretation and context.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, actually. So just thinking when you kind of compared it to like a movie rating, I guess for music, does that correlate to, I don't know, like repeated listening? Would that be like an equivalent of, showing that they enjoy something?
I think that's definitely one signal, and it's a really strong one, because it can show somebody, the more time you spend with something, the more obsessed or the more you like that thing for sure. But it doesn't always correlate, I think, is something we've learned. There are things that you spend less time with that you feel like are more core to who you are and more representative of your taste than things that you have on repeat that might just be in the background or on shuffle. So there are a
Hmm.
lot of different signals. People skip certain songs for different reasons. Um, and yeah, I think it's really nuanced.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like there's so many layers to dig into. I can only imagine what that data looks like. It's a huge puzzle piece.
For sure. Yeah, and something that we constantly have to be tweaking and learning about and taking into account the user's perspective and their input to make better and feel richer and more accurate.
Yeah, definitely. So, do you think that there can be two people that might look similar in the data, but in real life they actually have very different tastes. Can you maybe think of an example of how that might work or show up?
Yeah, definitely. I think two people can have very similar top artists or genres, or even like a lot of overlap across those things, but completely different relationships with the media. Kind of what I was saying earlier about context. I think the way a person engages with that thing can say a lot about them. Is it casual? Is it passive? Is it obsessive? And yeah, I think I realized this, with my own friends that like the same music as me, and I'm personally someone that listens to sad music for fun. I don't know if that's super common, but
Me
I
too.
really enjoy. Okay, good, good. I'm not alone, but I enjoy leaning into that emotional intensity. But I have friends that can't listen to sad music unless they're sad, so they have a completely different relationship with that kind of music than I do. And one example or a user quote that I heard from a user once that's really stuck with me was, "I wanna know if someone likes something the way I like it or if they hate it the way I hate it." And I think that says a lot about how you can relate with other people on like, very similarly on something and also really differently depending on your relationship with that thing.
Definitely. I think it's fascinating. Like, I think what you said really highlights, it's all about how you experience music emotionally as well, right? I always say there are two buckets of people with when it comes to sad music, which I always find really fascinating. Those people that either love it like us or, only go to it when they need it. And then they need it for different
Mm.
reasons as well, right? And then there's also two people that can love the same song for completely different reasons as well. And I think that does like both unite and divide us. So it's really, really fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think when you find somebody that likes something the way you like it, it's like this magic moment where you feel super connected to them and there's like this level of understanding. So I think there's a lot of depth to that.
Definitely. Okay, speaking of depth, then, how do you measure the depth of someone's taste versus like the breadth of someone's taste? Because, it can be so wide, right? But, it might be
Mhm.
kind of surface level in a lot of ways.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that intersection of those 2 is actually really interesting thing that we like to look at, and, yeah, breadth can tell you, how many genres or artists or categories somebody engages with, how wide that is, and then the depth can tell you, like, how devoted they are to it, like, what is their behavior around repetition, ho like, what's the staying power over time, how much are they returning to that thing, and I think it's interesting, so, like, some people are both highly exploratory and deeply attached, and that can tell you something really interesting about how, they move through culture. They're not just, like, going through things widely, but they're also, they're also sticking to things at the same time, and, to me, that combination, often says more than either breadth or depth on its own, like, seeing how those 2 intersect I is really interesting for me.
Yeah, that's so, so interesting. And I think it's such a wider kind of personality thing as well, probably. There's a lot of research which I'll kind of touch on a little bit later as well in our discussion, but a lot of research that correlates to, openness to experience, for example, and that would mean that maybe people are more open to exploring a wider range of genres, but maybe they only interact with those genres to a certain level. But then you have other people that really kind of dive deep into like those cultural moments and, for example, love to listen to, I don't know, I think about foreign language music, for example. That could be something. So yeah, I think there's like it's like such a multifaceted experience.
Mhm. Yeah, I think personally, I'm someone who has, like, a lot of breadth and depth, and sometimes you would think that wouldn't necessarily go together, but, yeah, I think it's interesting to see people who have both, and it's I think the matrix of that is something interesting to display to the user, make them feel proud of.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's completely possible to have both. And I think, if anything, that shows that you're a real, like, deep lover and appreciator of music on so many levels. Definitely a badge to wear
Mhm.
proudly, I would say.
For sure.
So, is there anything that you've seen throughout the years that's surprised you as an insight, you know, when you saw the data? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind that surprised or shocked you?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time looking at my own data, actually. I'm usually like the guinea pig for insights and for kind of gauging if something's working or not at the start. And I can relate with my data the best. So um, a lot of it feels like really, or at first felt really instantly obvious to me, but some of it actually kind of like challenged my self image or like how I perceive myself. So like the parts that were things that I would expect is, I listen to a lot of music. I get deeply obsessed with songs for weeks at a time. And on like the watching category stuff, I tend to watch either trash reality TV or like really intellectual documentaries, with almost nothing in between. So like I knew that about myself. But something that surprised me was realizing I'm not really as unique as I sometimes imagine myself to be. I think
Hmm.
a lot of people like to believe their taste is, more niche or singular than it really is. But I actually saw a lot of mainstreamness in my profile, which maybe ties back to the algorithm influencing taste points because um, I even often find myself talking with friends and talking about things I've seen online, and they're like, "Oh my god, I saw that on TikTok too." And it's like we're on the same side of TikTok, and we're all being fed a lot of the same things, and that definitely influences what I discover and therefore what I listen to and watch and read. And yeah, I think there's this risk in society right now of like flattening taste and becoming, homogenized as a culture. And I definitely see myself kind of like falling into that trap. Not necessarily that it's like a bad thing to be mainstream or like listen, read, and watch the same things as a lot of other people, but I definitely thought of myself as like a little bit more unique than the data tells me. Now that I'm like deep in the data.
I love that. I think a lot of us definitely pride ourselves on loving niche artists or, you know, having a unique identity when it comes to music. So I guess that can be quite a humbling experience.
For sure. Yeah.
But also, I don't know, in a weird way, kind of nice if you maybe think about it in a way that, oh, I never thought I could meet anyone that would have the same taste as me or would also like this
Mhm.
artist. And then, you know, if you spin it that way, you kind of feel a little bit less alone, I guess, and that you might be able to meet someone that has the same taste as you, which is always fun.
Definitely. I think there's, like, certain bands I've listened to that I'm like, "There's not a lot of people out here that like this or, like, listen to these, less discoverable songs of theirs," and then I find on Shelf there's, like, all these people on the leaderboard for this band, and I'm like, "Wow, there's, like, a community here," and it makes me feel, less alone. It makes me feel like, I have things in common with a lot of other people out there.
Definitely. And I guess validated in a way as well,
Mhm.
which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think also, um, through, like, constantly seeing my taste through the data and reflecting on, what I'm listening to and reading and watching, I become less self-conscious of my taste too.
Hmm.
Um, I think in the past, I would be more private about certain things, like maybe some of the trash reality TV I watch, I wouldn't expose as much or, certain, lesser known artists that, I don't think people would really be into, I wouldn't share as often. But with seeing all these communities out there that are also into them and constantly being able to reflect on my taste and who I am, it makes me more willing to share that publicly and to, like, accept those parts of myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So, you spoke obviously a lot
Mhm.
about Shelf, and a lot of people listening probably don't have an idea of what Shelf is or what you guys are doing. So, it would be great to, I guess, get an overview of some of the early days. Because I know in our initial discussion, you told me, you know, the path that you guys have taken to getting to where you are today. And you've done some really interesting kind of experiments that I'd love everyone to kind of hear a little bit about.
Yeah, we've tried a lot of different things. One of our earliest experiments, which I mentioned earlier, was an SMS-based experience where people would pair songs with emojis that matched the vibe or mood of that song, and then other people could discover those songs by texting those emojis. And it was really simple and, kind of silly, but it was interesting because even in that simple format, you could already see people were using music as a kind of emotional language. And they weren't just recommending songs, but they were translating like feeling and mood and identity to something other people could instantly understand. And that was a really early sign to us that taste is powerful, not just because of what people like, but because of how they naturally use it to communicate who they are and to connect with other people. And over time, that evolved from lightweight experiments into more explicit taste products and identity based insights. And we've done a lot of experimentation around insights that are solo about yourself, recaps of yourself, BuzzFeed like personality insights, and also done some experiments around comparative insights. So, like, we had an experiment that told you who your music soulmate was, who your Netflix soulmate was, things like that.
Love it.
Um, and the through line has always been, like, can taste become a way people understand themselves and connect with other people? And we've been constantly trying to kind of prove that hypothesis.
Yeah, definitely. Music's always been this kind of social glue, and people have always used it to connect and express something that they can't say directly. And of course, not just music, right? On shelf, it's kind of all kinds of media and things. But you've kind of turned that into a system, which I think is a really, really cool shift. But what would you say is something that makes taste matching feel meaningful rather than like a gimmick, let's say?
That's a great question. Yeah. I think it comes back to just really feeling representative, not just clever, because I think people can really tell when something is just like a fun mechanic versus when it actually feels true. And I think having the evidence, like the data behind the insight, behind the matching is really important for that. So not just I'm this personality or this percent compatible with this person, but the why is really important.
Yeah, definitely. It is. And I think that comes into a big part of any product, which is trust, right? And showing your users that you're doing something valuable with their data and using it in the most, I guess, intelligent way to inform the insights that you're giving them. So, how do you kind of build trust with your users when you're interpreting something as personal as taste in general?
Yeah, I think trust is the most important thing we're trying to achieve. And it's been a big lesson for us that, when trust breaks, the system, feels flat and stale and unfixable. And we've learned that people really need some sense of agency in shaping what represents them. It's not just us telling them you are this or this is your data, but them helping shape that with us. Otherwise, the product starts to feel like it's defining you and instead of helping you better understand yourself. So that user agency and control is really important to us.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. Was there a specific moment that you were working on a product or offering that you really thought to yourself, there's something really powerful here, like we're moving in the right direction?
Mhm. I don't know if it was a specific moment, but definitely over time, we started hearing users say things like, "Wow, that's so me," or like, "That feels, like how I view myself,"
Mm,
or, it's very different reaction from "That's just accurate, that's correct." But there's like recognition that comes with "That's so me," where they're seeing shelf more as a mirror of themselves. Um, and it kind of clicked that shelf could be more than just tracking behavior and actually help people feel seen, which is like a real human need. And I think that's when taste becomes powerful. It stops feeling like just product output and feels more like that mirror that I was just describing.
yeah, definitely. I'm so glad that you used that word mirror because that was exactly what I was going to say. And I think that's such a powerful moment to feel like you're having yourself reflected back at you. And I think that ties back into, what I was saying about our love for data. I think that those moments are really powerful that we're able to feel seen in that moment.
For sure. And something we'll continue to work towards. I think it's a really hard problem to solve, but it's something that we're pretty committed to.
Yeah, for sure. A super exciting journey. I love it. So I know we've touched a lot on people communicating through music and, using music as an identity externally. When you share something, you're like, this is a part of me. But in your experience, when people share music, what do you think they're actually trying to communicate about themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, but it's usually not just, "I like this song." More often, it's, like, trying to share a part of yourself and, what mood you're in, what kind of person you are, what kind of taste you have, and I think music is one of the easiest ways people signal identity. I think people wanna feel proud of their taste, they wanna feel cool, they wanna feel mysterious, they wanna feel all these different types of things, and I think that's a big reason why you see so much of people like sharing music on their Instagram stories, sharing their Spotify Wrapped. It's kind of a gateway into who they are and how they want to be perceived by the outside world.
Yeah, definitely. But sharing is selective, right? It's curated in a way. We're saying to the world, this is how I want to be seen, or this is how I feel in that moment. And I think that ties into what we touched on a little bit earlier around like private listening versus like public sharing, because I think that differs quite a lot for all of us, right? We've all got this private playlist, I'm sure, that we wouldn't be comfortable with everyone hearing. So I wonder
Mhm.
what's been your experience with, how people privately listen versus what they publicly kind of share.
Yeah, there's a lot of learnings around that, and I think private and public listening are very different, and sharing are very different. Private listening can be, messier, more emotional, can just be something you have on in the background that's not necessarily, core to yourself. But the things you share publicly, like you said, are definitely more curated. People aren't usually sharing like a log of everything they consumed. They're sharing, the parts that they resonate with the most, that are also kind of saying something about themselves that they wanna signal about their identity. And I think when it comes to public sharing, we learned a lot that the format and the framing of what is shared matters almost as much as the content itself.
Hmm.
Um, I think taste sharing lives on a very fine line between kind of humble bragging about yourself and being, like, performative, or, like I think, people wanna show they have good taste in a way that feels effortless, and when it feels like try hard or cringe, I think that's where people, aren't incentivized to share. Um, we even see this behavior in our product, and, um, on Mondays for when we send out our weekly recap notification, we see a lot of users screenshotting the notification copy we send. So, for example, we'll say something like, "It looks like your entire personality is Sabrina Carpenter this week," and users just love sharing just, like, the screenshot of that notification, as opposed to going in and, like, sharing the actual weekly recap, sometimes. And I think part of this is, the screenshot feels like something you're being told rather than something you're telling people about yourself, and it creates that distance, that makes it feel more effortless, and it feels more like third-party validation and less like self-promotion. So, I think there's also nuance to what you share publicly and, like, how you share it, and that really matters a lot.
Definitely. That's so interesting and a really interesting topic for me as well. Because when I worked at Spotify, I worked a lot in the kind of sharing area. So we worked on everything, to do with sharing music on WhatsApp, Instagram, whatever platform it might be. And we had really similar insights. I did a project looking specifically at Gen Z and how Gen Z wanted to share playlists. And, we did this cool co creation study with them where they were able to, design their own playlist share card and really put in all the elements that they valued the most. So, whether that was the playlist title, whether that was the length of the playlist or the number of songs or whatever. And what you said there about the kind of format, but also it not feeling too pretentious is like a big thing because we also encountered this whole screenshot sharing thing quite often was like, people would just take a screenshot of their playlist rather than actually going through the share button and like sharing the artifact that way. We were kind of like, why are people doing this? Why are people hacking around this? But actually, it does feel more authentic for a lot of people. And also our I guess, shareable artifact wasn't including those key elements that they wanted to show. Like maybe they wanted to show, the first three songs in the playlist. Maybe that was really important for the storytelling or like to give a snapshot. So, yeah, it's really like fascinating insights in this area, I feel like.
Yeah, and it is definitely like a newer thing. Like I think with Gen Z especially, like authenticity is really important, like you said, and coming off kind of like effortlessly cool and but still kind of having that same effect of where people are like, oh wow, their taste is so great. At the same time, like there's a fine line there.
Definitely. And just being able to feel like you're expressing yourself through what you share as well, I think is really important. So yeah, a lot of nuance there, but definitely I think it changes from generation to generation how important, the artifact is versus like exactly what you're sharing, which is really interesting as well.
Yeah, aesthetics play a huge part in that too. We notice, we have some customization features where you can like change the colors of your shelf and things like that. And people are always asking for more ways to curate, more ways to decorate, their taste to make it feel more like them. And I think, yeah, the visual nature of it is just as important. I'm sure you learned at Spotify Wrapped too, or like with Spotify Wrapped at Spotify, that's super important.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a huge, huge part of it. And that does tie into something else as well that was kind of playing on my mind, which is, again, another quite loaded question. I think there's quite a big debate here, but how much of music sharing do you think is about connection versus validation? An
hmm
interesting one.
Yeah. I think they're really tied together, honestly. Like, I think people definitely use music to connect maybe at the outset. I mean, I personally love when I find a song and I'm like, a friend would really like this, or like, it really reminds me of this friend. And then I send it to them and they actually listen to it. They actually appreciate it. Maybe they add it to their playlist. There's a lot of connection that can come from those kinds of interactions. But then there's definitely validation tied to that too, because, you know, I want people to think my taste is good. I want to feel like interesting and thoughtful, head of the curve, things like that. So while sharing is often a way to connect at first, I think it also kind of shapes how other people perceive you and can then kind of validate a lot of things about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think about, when we did research on sharing, people had expressed that they'd wanted to have some kind of, how there's read receipts. They wanted to kind of have like play receipts to actually make sure that the songs that they sent to people were actually being listened to. And, it could be cool to see whether or not, that person actually saved the song that you shared with them or did something with that. Because I think for a lot of people, that is a huge part of it, right? It's not just about the sharing, but it's also like, hey, I need you to listen to this to actually understand either how I feel or like what I like. And also just the fact that I've thought of you and I've taken time out of my day to share this song with you. And that means a lot to me. So please listen to it and do something with it.
For sure, and I've experienced that on shelf with my friends and family where sometimes I'll send something to them and later see it's like one of their top songs on their shelf, and that makes me
Yes.
feel really good. I'm like, "Wow, they really appreciate my taste and they're spending time with it," and, it's really validating.
Definitely. Yeah, it really, really is. So I know you've mentioned a couple of user quotes so far, but did any user stories in particular stick with you that really changed about how you think about music and identity overall?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to, um the context piece, like, people don't wanna feel like their taste is being flattened. They want, their contradictions to coexist. I think having, Shelf being multimedia really plays into that, where people can really express their multi-hyphen itself. They can have their indie pop girl live alongside, like, their hardcore rap phase, and, like, their trash reality TV live next to their, like, I don't know, physics books. And I think that really helps people feel like, there's a space that can holistically fully represent them. And we're even working towards having, more categories on shelf to fill that picture even more for people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think just having a space where you can have all of these things about you in one place is really rare about shelf. There's a lot of platforms that, you can have, your movie tastes on Letterboxd, and you can have your reading tastes on Goodreads, things like that. But having it all together and being able to have those cross-category insights about who you are is really powerful and makes people feel like more of their identity and who they are live on shelf.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think it is such a unique thing that you're offering to be able to bring all of these kind of dimensions of yourself that are usually quite separated. You know, people tend to ask them as separate questions, right? Like, what music do you like? What movies do you like? And they're always, you know, kind of more separated. But this is a great way to kind of put everything together because I think, yeah, it really does contribute to identity as a whole. And I guess, of course, over here we're talking about music, but for some people, you know, maybe they don't value music as much on that level. Maybe for them it's books, maybe for them it's movies, and music takes the back seat. So I think that's also really important to acknowledge as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. So I know, you know, everything that we've talked about today, thinking about connection, you know, sharing versions of ourselves and, you know, projecting an identity. I think that leads to a bigger discussion. And I've previously done an episode on music and romantic relationships. You know, I've spoken about taste and preferences in general. And it's a part that really fascinates me, you know, being able to connect with people as friends, you know, in relationships through the music that you love. So, what are your kind of thoughts on that? You know, connecting over music or just kind of in taste in general? You know, what makes two people match beyond this kind of surface level as well?
Yeah, I think taste definitely plays a huge role in friendship and relationships. I think if two people really love something in a the same way, it can feel like you skipped a few hours of getting to know them and immediately feels familiar, kind of lowers that social barrier. Um, and yeah, I think it's not just because, you have the shared taste, but it often reflects something deeper. You have shared interests, maybe similar personality or temperament. And I think taste can correlate with, these deeper personality traits and how people process the world. And it creates this kind of cultural shorthand that you have, that you can relate on. So I think there's definitely something deeper than just liking the same artist that, you know, you you can create a friendship on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's this really strong finding in psychology that we're naturally drawn to people who are similar to us, right? And music taste kind of acts as like a shortcut for that. You know, as if someone likes the same music as you, like you said, you almost feel like you get them instantly. And there is like a huge body of research as well, like linking music taste to personality. So I think, you know, because of this whole thing potentially mapping to personality traits, when you connect over music, you might actually be aligning on deeper traits without actually realizing it. So I think that's always a great starting point as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's not necessarily like having maximum overlap with that person on like you like, a lot of the same things, but it's more about like how meaningful is that overlap? Is this, my diehard favorite band that's like super niche that no one else gets that this person just gets about me? Like I think that's more powerful than us both liking Taylor Swift, for example.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. I think it comes back to that depth and breadth kind of conversation that we had as well. I do also wonder, do you think there's such a thing as being too similar? You know, do you think that some level of difference actually makes the connection more interesting? Because, you know, there's so much research and stuff in general out there about overlapping tastes, but not so much about differences. And I think that opposites attract sometimes, right? But I guess you do have to have some kind of like ground level.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I definitely think there could be a thing as like too similar in taste. Um, I think, the most interesting taste matches are often not identical, but adjacent, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, like where you have enough overlap to feel understood by this person, but also enough difference to introduce each other to something new. And I think discovery is a huge part of a relationship. Um, and I see a lot of times, even with our users that like are following people they don't know on shelf, a lot of times they see, this enough overlap where they're like, okay, this person gets me, but they see an opportunity to learn from them and to discover from them and get recommendations. And I think that's where the connection can become deeper. Um, and yeah, I think a good match is not just, you're the same, but you overlap enough that I trust your taste, and you're different enough that you can expand my taste.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just a question that came up when you were kind of talking about that. Do you think that there's certain levels of, I guess, like genres or artists that maybe sit among all of us that act as kind of stronger connectors between us and other people? Like, is there a kind of
Mhm.
pyramid I'm kind of thinking about of, okay, this is my top artist, but then there might be an artist that means something on another level? Like, what do you think are some of those predictors there?
Yeah. I think I'd separate genres and artists a little bit because I think genres can be a little looser. I think there's like
Mm,
wider surface area with genres, and we were actually doing some experiments with matching over genres, and it was less of a connector than we thought it would be. I think two people, liking indie or pop will tell you something, but it's still pretty broad. And artists are often a much sharper signal, and songs even sharper because it's an even more granular kind of component. Um, and even there, like not all artists, I think, are equally meaningful as connectors. Like I was saying, someone who's extremely popular, like a Taylor Swift, there can be a connection there, but it's a little bit less specific potentially. Whereas like finding someone who's into something super niche is often much more revealing because it's there's a higher barrier to being into something that's niche.
yeah.
Um, so I think like the strongest connectors are usually things that are more specific, and like more identity rich. And it's less about niche automatically being like a better signal, but it's more that like the rarer overlap tends to say more.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think it's so nuanced and differs a lot for everyone, right? And like I said, not just music, but other things as well.
Hmm. For sure.
Amazing. So, speaking of other things, I know what's really interesting is that at Shelf, you're not just thinking about this in terms of music anymore. You're starting to explore taste beyond that. Of course, there's movies and books and all of those other things, but there's also elements like lifestyle, shopping, culture, which really feels like a natural next step. So, can you tell me a little bit about what those moves are kind of looking like?
Yeah, for sure. I think, as I mentioned, we are trying to get a full picture of somebody and their taste and who they are. And that goes beyond just music. I think music is often a clear starting point. It's, really emotional and expressive and social. And there's a lot of it that people consume. And while it might be the entry point, into the experience, there's real opportunity in understanding taste across a full mix of what people are into. And for us, the broader vision has always been bigger than music. We already support watching and reading categories. And we found that to be really important because people don't just experience identity through one domain. Um, and yeah, the bigger picture is a profile that reflects, all of your aesthetic preferences and cultural interests and emotional patterns. So that could expand to a lot more categories, like you mentioned, like fashion, food,
Hmm.
travel, all those kinds of things.
Super cool. So, do you think that taste is consistent across all of those kind of different domains like music, fashion, food, or do you think it's quite fragmented?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges on like the data science part of things because there's like underlying consistencies across different categories, but they show up a lot of times very differently. Like for example, like you're consuming music all the time, whereas you're consuming a book or a show or a movie maybe a little less frequently, and there's like waiting involved there, and um, yeah, I think, something like a movie requires a bigger commitment and maybe, you put more weight on that as something that's core to somebody's taste profile at the time than, the one song they were listening to. Um, so I think, yeah, there's a lot of things that, can be mapped across categories, but then there's a lot of different behaviors with the way that people consume and experience um, different categories as well that makes it kind of difficult to weight it within a profile. Um, yeah, so it can be coherent underneath, but uneven in how it shows up, I guess, depending on the domain.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so complex, people's personality, their taste. I think it's absolutely fascinating to get into that. But I think there's also this really interesting aspect of it when we think about, the future of maybe like a taste-based internet. And I think we're getting into the weeds of it a little bit now, even coming back to like TikTok and Instagram, of course, with all the algorithms that we have, that's arguably based on our taste, is based on what we love, what we dislike, and we're really being driven by that. And we're, of course, seeing some of the risks today that come with that. Do you think that there are any risks like applying taste profiling to things like shopping or services or things like that when we think about the industry in general?
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. I think privacy is one. Like people are more private about, for example, like their shopping history maybe than their music listening. And there's certain, ways of treating that data differently so that, you can help people feel like they're putting out their most representative self. I think you can also overfit identities. So you can treat someone like the same person forever or base it off of a certain part of their history. Um, and yeah, I think assuming what they consume is the most truest version of them can have some limitations. I think
Hmm.
this is why we think it's really important for taste profiles to be a joint effort between platform and user. So the user helps to shape and curate that over time. They can remove things that they don't like. They can provide context into why they were doing something, who they were doing it with. They can have a hand in kind of shaping that so that it's not something that's being overfit for them.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And, I kind of think about these, potentially like echo chambers of taste, similar to these algorithmic bubbles that we have now. And I wonder, like, do you think that this means that we won't get the opportunity to discover like new things or kind of go through these transformations? I think about times in our life where, our taste has changed due to certain factors. You get this urge to change yourself. We've all been there, like, really to reinvent yourself. So, what do you think this means for like dynamic identities, or will we kind of be expected to live in our bubbles?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a danger. I think if systems get too good at reinforcing what already feels familiar, they can narrow people instead of expanding them. And I think like there's kind of a balance between, serving someone something that feels familiar, but yet like niche enough at the same time, where it's like something that they can discover and branch out into different parts of themselves and different perspectives. Um, and I think that's, yeah, the challenge with a lot of algorithmic bubbles is helping people expand beyond what's in front of them and what they know and what they're comfortable with, um, and leaving room for surprise and contradiction and reinvention.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's such an interesting topic that I think we could talk about for a really long time. I think time will tell, but overall, I'm so excited for everything you're doing, everything that Shelf is doing. I think it really is the future, especially with AI. I think this need for self-expression and creativity and identity, I think that's going to raise even more. People are going to really want to hold on to those elements of themselves that really make them unique and who they are. So I think that's a really interesting element of it as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of platforms are leaning on AI for like that interpretation layer and for helping people make sense of themselves. And it has to be done with a lot of care because I think there's a lot of assumptions AI makes. There's like a lot of slop out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, making sure that, there's that the human touch to it still feels authentic is important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've all been pushed AI fruit videos in the past few weeks, and I
Mhm.
don't think anyone asked for those, right? So,
Yeah, I don't know what happened to my feed to make it think I like that, but I'd like to know. I'd like to know the data science behind that.
yeah, maybe that answers our questions, that we won't be living in a bubble, that we'll still be pushed random things that we might really dislike. But this has been such an amazing discussion. I know we've touched on so much today. I think we've moved from something that feels quite simple, like what music do you like? And we've moved into something that's much deeper than that and really spoken about, identity, self expression, and just, our taste, not just music, but all those other things that are really a way of connecting with other people, and even something that can be measured and built into products, which I think is so amazing. So, just to wrap up our discussion today, what would you say you've personally learned about taste from working on all of this throughout the years?
Yeah, I think maybe to echo a lot of what was already shared, I think just taste is just much more than what people consume. It's how they understand themselves and how they present themselves. Um, and people, I think, care like less about being measured than about being represented. And I think the way, the format, the framing, the presentation of who you are is almost as important as like the content itself. And people want to feel seen and feel proud of their taste. They want to share it with other people to connect and feel validated. Um, so yeah, a lot of learnings along those lines in particular.
Yeah, definitely. And has it changed the way that you see your own identity through music at all?
It definitely made me more aware. I think I think about what I'm consuming a lot more. Like on my commute to work, I am like really intentional about what I'm like putting on my queue. And what I'm actually, spending time with, what I'm watching on TV, what I'm picking up to read. I think of it more as like, does this feel like me, or like, why am I, attracted to watching this kind of thing? Or I don't know, it makes me reflect a lot more. Um, and also, yeah, feel more comfortable with those parts of myself because I'm more exposed to them more regularly. I'm reflecting on them. And yeah, also realizing there's community out there that also likes these things too. Yeah, it makes me feel less alone. Other people resonate with this stuff. So a lot of different kind of reflections have happened over the last couple of years when it
For
comes to my
sure.
taste. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So tell me, if you had to describe your taste in like one word or one sentence, how would you put it?
So that's really hard, and I think that that comes back to just, like, the fact that it's hard to describe taste as, like, a fixed thing.
Hmm.
But maybe I would say, like, contradiction.
Oh,
Um, because I think it's complex, like, I think there's a lot of different sides of myself, that I'm expressing every day, and yeah, I watch, like I mentioned, like, a lot of reality TV, but also intellectual documentaries and, like, spiritual books, and, like, I like pop music, but also, like, these niche bands, and I think there's a lot of contradiction to that that just makes up who I am. So, yeah, it would be really hard to do one sentence or one word, but that's the best I got right now.
I love that. And I think that really just kind of sums up everything that we've spoken about. But just as a kind of final, bigger question behind all of this to wrap up, what do you think that data still can't capture when it comes to human taste? Like, if someone analyzed your entire music history, what could they just get completely wrong about you, according to the data?
Yeah, I think it's really context. It's like, what is that meaning and intent behind what I'm consuming? Why am I reaching for something versus another thing? Um, like I mentioned, like I listen to a lot of sad music. Like maybe if we plug that into an LLM, it would tell me I'm like a deeply sad, depressed person, but that's not necessarily the truth. I feel like I am a very happy, optimistic person. I just genuinely love to listen to like sad music. So I think there's, that missing context, that the data won't be able to fully capture unless we're able to kind of jointly curate that, with the user themselves.
Definitely. That's very true. It got me thinking about my own kind of music taste as well, just kind of writing everything down on a piece of paper. And if I would give that to someone blindly and just kind of assume things about me, I wonder that would be a fun exercise to do.
Yeah, what kind of assumptions do you think would come up for you?
You know what? I think it's very similar to what you had said. I also have a very broad taste. I grew up in, a household that loved music. My mum listened to a lot of 80s music, so I loved that. But then I would say my top genre is like hip hop and R&B, so my top artist is always The Weeknd.
Nice.
But then I love a lot of like foreign language music as well. Like I absolutely love Russian music. I do not speak Russian. I have no links whatsoever, but I absolutely love it. And yeah, I think it's, and I also really enjoy sad music a lot of the time. So I think when I just kind of think about if I were to put all of that on a piece of paper and the kind of person that I would think would be behind that is definitely not the kind of person that I am. So yeah, super interesting to kind of think about that. I'd love to like anonymize all my friends' music taste. Maybe I'll do that as a party game. Give it to everyone and do a personality analysis.
That would be really fun. Or have people guess whose taste is whose. That would be a good game.
Definitely. I love that. That's awesome. But Jennie, thank you so much. It's been so amazing to chat with you today. Tell us, where can everyone find you? Is there anywhere that you're active online, anywhere that people can follow you?
Yeah, for sure. You can follow me at Jennie Silber, my full name, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and you can download Shelf on the App Store. Just type in Shelf app on iOS, coming to Android soon. And also follow me at Jennie on Shelf.
Amazing. Yes, everyone definitely download Shelf. It's such a fun app, and I think everyone listening to this will really, really enjoy it. So definitely encourage everyone to check that out. But Jennie, thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion.
Yeah, such a pleasure to be here. Such a fun conversation. Thanks for having me.
I love it. So great to have Jennie on today. I'm really just loving expanding the podcast and bringing more guests on. So if you've enjoyed today's episode and love this format, please rate a review on wherever you're listening. And of course, share it with someone who loves music just as much as you do. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And also come and say hi on Instagram and Threads at the Sound Mind Talks. You can always let me know if there's anyone that you'd like to see on the podcast as well. But until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on the Sound Mind.